Okay. My name is Jillian Hartley. I'm a professor of history at Arkansas Northeastern College, and I'm also on the National Cold War Center Advisory Board. And today I am thrilled to have the opportunity to interview Susan Kratz. Susan is going to talk with us about her career in the military and her time at West Point in the early 1980s. Is that correct, Susan?
Yes, that is correct, Jillian.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for being here. And do I have your permission to record this interview?
Yes, you do.
Lovely. Susan, can you tell us just a little bit about your childhood, your life growing up, where you were born, that kind of stuff?
Yes, my maiden name is the Benedictus, and I say that because it's from the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania area, and so as you can tell, I'm from Italian background, so and Irish, but when your last name is the Benedictus, you just go with the Italian. It's simple. So I grew up outside of Philadelphia, and family of five children. My parents, my mother was 12 years younger than my father. My father was a World War II um, corpsman in the Army Air Corps. He was a mechanic somewhere in Britain. I'm joking, but that's the name of a book I found. So he was actually stationed on the eastern coast. He was pretty far deployed for that period of time at the beginning of World War II. And we were kind of happy in retrospect that he was not an infantryman, because that means he came back home and we were able to be born. So and you think those ways as a military person or even as a student of history. So but that actually impacted some things, because my mother had issues from, well, not issues. She grew up during World War II, and she would never buy a foreign car, especially not a Japanese or German car. So any kind of those things would carry over from, at least from my mom. My dad was pretty even keeled. He never even talked about World War II because he felt he was fortunate, likely fortunate for survival and stuff like that. So he just kept it cool.
Well, that's not the first time I've heard of somebody who kind of had the tendencies like your mom did, who were
Yes.
World War II generation. So did you have a pretty strong Italian community? Just out of curiosity, you mentioned the name and the connection.
Yes, yes. We had, again, Philadelphia has a very strong Italian community. South Philly, where my father was born, was traditionally Italian and things like that. And then all his relatives and stuff like that. My grandmother, my Nona, she actually still spoke Italian, although when she was taking care of us, she all of a sudden knew English if we were trying to get over. And so that was very cool. But and I failed to mention that five of the five children, four out of five of us joined the military. And
Wow.
my dad was a corporal in the Army Air Corps, so um, ground maintenance team for like four or five B-52s. So yes, some of us did it to go to college. Actually, all of us did it, and were either planning to go in on active duty or did go on active duty.
So you
So
went,
mhm.
so you went, tell me a little bit about your school before duty. Like, where did you go to high school? And I think you also mentioned you went to community college before joining.
Yes, yes. Um, we went to Catholic school, so I was by the time I was in the military, I was very comfortable with wearing a uniform. So I wore a uniform first through eighth grade, and then all the way to senior year of high school. And made your life easier, though. You didn't have to worry about what you were going to wear to school. But the in fact, all of us went to. We didn't go to public school. My oldest brother messed it up, got in trouble. Paul, if you're listening. So we all had to go to Catholic school. And that instilled with, I was familiar with rules, keeping the rules, and kind of discipline and things like that. However, I did get in trouble in high school. So the high school was run by Lithuanian nuns. They had two schools, one in Chicago, and the other one was outside of Newtown, Pennsylvania, and it's where they had a nursing facility for geriatric nursing facility and stuff like that. And so when you're talking, this is the 70s, I graduated in 78. When you're talking to the world cultures teacher and you tell her that, I don't think communism, really socialism, isn't that bad. And she's from Lithuania. She told me the deal because they had lived under communist rule. And, and it was her opinion forbidden and stuff. But I'll be honest with you, the military, I found, was a meritocracy, but it did have some socialistic tendencies, the medication, the healthcare, and also 90% of the people got promoted together, unless there was the bell curve. So there was the 10% who got promoted early based on their performance reports. And then there was the 10 or 20% who were asked to leave, pretty much told, or they received such poor performance reports, they were not promoted to the next level. So I do think that's, especially nowadays, it's important to know.
That is really important to know. And so you initially don't join the military, you go to college at a community college. Can you tell us a little bit about what made you want to go from college to the military? And just
Yes.
Yeah.
The community college, I have a twin sister. And so my oldest brother went to West Point. And so he went ahead to West Point kind of last minute, but it was all good. And I think my mom and my dad were like, I don't think you girls are ready, my mom, not my dad, to go to college on your own. So I'd like you to do community college. So this is before the internet. We were nerds, we were geeks. So we called up St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia, a Jesuit school, and said, we can't, we're going to go to Bucks County Community College. What should we take? And they told us, we took it. Excuse me, we received the requisite grades, and then it all transferred and stuff like that. So my mom made us be independent and industrious. You know what I mean? Doing things on our own. That's independent. So
Yeah.
And it worked out well. And then we both went to the same college, but she lived on campus and I lived off campus because we were truly trying to separate. That's the thing about being twins. But she had actually already joined the Army Reserve after high school. She went to basic training and things like that. So then she was going to use that, and she does when she goes to St. Joe's. She goes to Drexel University for Army ROTC. So she was commissioned well before me, and which is fine because she had gone to basic training. But that is a whole nother story. I maybe need to pass your name. I mean, you want her information to her.
So your sister has already joined the reserves. She's doing that. You've got a brother, you said already, who went to West Point. So I'm assuming did that influence your decision? Could you tell us a little bit about how you made your way to West Point?
Yes, it did. I did. We went up to visit my brother. We lived only an hour and a half away. And so, and West Point, I mean, physically, it's a national park. It's beautiful. It's got the history and things like that. And then we actually watched my brother go in on reception day, and we were able to find him like in the crowd, even though he had a haircut and he's wearing gym clothes, a gym uniform. that they had given him. We were able to find him, and we took pictures of him, and we got to watch it all to go through. And I was there like, this doesn't seem that tough. But so then I think the wheels started going. But I waited, and I actually waited and didn't tell anybody that I had applied to go to West Point, because I was, over 18, and then I took the SATs again, so it had stronger entrance scores and things like that. And the fact that I had, at the end, second semester of my sophomore year, now I'm at St. Joseph's, I received a call that, was accepted. I had to get an appointment from either a congressman or a senator from Pennsylvania. And once you get the appointment, then you're in, type of thing.
But you didn't tell your family until you knew you were pretty much in. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Well, and of course, this would have been what year were you accepted? What year did you go in?
I went in July of 1980.
Okay.
So that's when I entered. Yes, you lose your summer, but July of 1980. So I guess I was accepted earlier in the spring or late winter of 1980 at the latest.
Well, and so when a lot of people think about that particular time period, Reagan's elected in 80, takes office in 81. So may I ask, did anything going on with the Cold War influence your decision? Was this something that was because really things started to heat back up about the time that you went in. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Very good point. I had, I guess to me, it was the status quo. It is what it is. And I followed the newspapers. I watched the evening news. I was, again, kind of nerdy, but it did not bother me. When I was at St. Joe's, don't tell St. Joe's this, but I was a business major. And so I no longer wanted to to be a business major. I didn't like the profit motive. Goes back to my socialist roots. So, I think my Catholic upbringing, which, social services and even the Jesuit school,
a strong emphasis on good deeds and good works in Catholicism.
Correct. Oh,
yeah.
Great editor.
Well, no, it's great. And so you're
Yes.
there at West Point. Now, I do want to, for anybody watching, let them know that this is not a time where women had been allowed to enter West Point for many years. So
Correct.
tell us a little bit about the experiences of going to West Point and what it was like, because you were in, did you say the 5th graduating class?
Right. So I reported on July 1st of 1980, the first female class graduated in May of 1980. So 2 months later, I showed up. And my brother had graduated a year before, the class of 1979, who was the last all-male class, of which they were proud of. They didn't, sometimes the military or even West Point with certain words you weren't allowed to say and stuff like that, because you're contracted, you're in a controlled environment, you're in the military. And so you can be disciplined for using divisive terms and things like that. So, and my brother did confide in me that even though I was his sister, he did not think that women belonged at West Point.
Hmm. Seeing that graduating class, though, as you came in, did that give you a little,
Yes, I did look at their statistics, and this was a little later. I was, there were women with college degrees who applied, just as long as you met the age requirement and things like that. And so they had some attrition because no one else had been there before. And the attrition continued to get less as the years, as each class of women. And now attrition is something they're trying to you can't eliminate it. But if you've gone through all, just like with recruiting for the
Mhm.
military, you go through all those steps to make sure you pre-screen them, screen them, and things like that. Uh, they're trying, West Point works however it needs to make sure that as many of these qualified people graduate that should and
Right.
can. So
Well, can you give us just a rundown? What were some of the
yeah,
first days like? Some reflections on your experiences there?
I had to get my hair cut off. Back those days, you had to cut your hair off. Now they don't have to, which I think is wonderful. I saw met with some of my classmates and who happen to be female because we do meet separately. It's not because we don't like the guys. It's just that we just have other experiences too. And so they go, "Oh, did you see everybody? That's everybody has long hair." And I go, "Yes," and I think it's wonderful because you know you don't have to go get a haircut.
Yeah.
And are we getting over? I don't know. I actually had an officer ask me that. It was a welcome interview or initial interview with me and another. I was a major at a time, me and another major, and he goes to me, "Well, so why do you get to wear your hair long? Where he doesn't. He's got to shave his face every day."
Mhm.
He didn't joke. He didn't say anything about that, but I know some male cadets when I was a cadet was like, well, one woman had fair skin and dark hair on top of her lip. Should I have made? He goes, should she have shaved? And so it's like, oh man, is it affecting her uniform? Is it affecting the way she wears her protective mask? And that's what I said for the hairstyles. I said, as long as it doesn't mess with the uniform, the protective gear, or whatever's required. And when it does, then they get their hair cut, whatever the Army decides. So, because it's a contract and you signed it
Yeah.
at college.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I try to, be an adult and kind of look for uh, logical reasons. So,
Yeah. So it's a good mix of training and education at West Point.
correct. Oh my goodness. We had a course called History of the Military Art. And so military, there's doctrine and then there's art. And I took the 2 semester course. And because I only clept out of one course because I had 2 years of college. You're going to go 4 years anyway there. So the only course I clept out of was economics because I had it at St. Joe's. They used the same textbook actually. So the micro and the macro, which was good because I went to an all girls high school, and which I will not name, but my math background was not that strong. And so I had to take pre-calculus, which was great. I was not the only one. There were males and mostly males and females in that. And so ended up being good because I didn't know I was good at science, but because I was delayed a semester for physics and chemistry. Oh, it was a engineering curriculum at the time for everybody. But we did get 10 electives we were allowed to choose over the,
So you went with military art. Like how,
yes,
yeah.
it was very, very good. So you learn, just like you said, and the same with leadership and the same with getting along with other cadets. You don't just say what you think before you speak. That's, communications. But I apologize, another thing I want to mention when we went to the academic building, I all I was hit with was there were urinals in all the women's bathrooms. And I joked and said, well, maybe we could get some plants and plant, something that doesn't need a lot of sun. And you can just water it
Yeah.
just a little bit.
So convenient there. We just and it shows
But
you.
over the 4 years, they removed them.
I was going to say it
They
takes a while
updated.
for infrastructure to catch up to
Yes, yes.
when people are brought in. So when you look at the culture and being a woman who's there in the early years, what are some of the challenges that you clearly had because you were a female that maybe some of the men didn't have?
Whenever we did something physical, there was we had a different physical standard. We didn't write it, the Army wrote it. In fact, it got to a point where annually the sit-up requirement, they found that women could do sit-ups and just as well as men. And but nope, they stopped for 100 points, at too short of the men's goal. And I was kind of like, oh, and don't get me wrong, I know how I went to the class at the school where they take tons of data and it's all data driven. So, but it's almost like, so you always exceeded the standard for anything physical. The physical training test, the PT test. And so it was best to do that. And at West Point, I remember calling my sister, who's in the Army, and saying, man, I only got a C on the APFT. And she goes, how many points did you get? I said 320. She goes, 300 is passing. And you only got a C? And then I asked someone and they said, like the upperclassmen, the upper class women in this case, but they were upperclassmen. We didn't get all persnickety about the gender. We're always there if you had a question. In fact, when I was a plebe or a freshman, they would bring us in periodically and ask us what questions we had and things like that. But so I asked, and they said, well, they have to have the bell curve for the people on the track team, and those runners and all need to have where they get the A, and you were truly average. Sorry, so you got the C.
Even though you went 20 over, like
yes,
you still were the C. That's a really interesting thing. And I love how you said did you say plebe?
Yes.
So for people who may not know that, that's sort of a Roman term for
yes,
the non-patrician class. And so was that
yes.
Yeah.
No, yes, it was. And we had to square the walls. We had to walk along the sides of the corridors, and going down the stairwells, we had to go the corners. And then we also, 10 minutes before formation, we had to call out the minutes until formation. So you went out for the 10-minute. And usually, the upperclassmen, which is sophomores, juniors, and seniors, knew when they had to get dressed and make sure they were ready to go to formation. We'd do a 10-minute call, and then you could go back to your room and hide, because sometimes some of the yearlings, the sophomores, would come out and quiz you on your knowledge. We had a book of knowledge called Bugle Notes that we had to memorize, which we've been doing since July, so it's okay.
Bugle Notes. So one of the things that's interesting is you had mentioned that there was a movie called Women of West Point, and when I watched it, one of the things that stood out to me was that pretty much all the instructors were males, which kind of makes sense, because if you go for years without allowing women in to be trained, then suddenly you go into a time where even if you allow women in, you're more likely to have males. So was that pretty much the standard? Was it pretty much male instructors?
I am looking back, and excuse me, I do not think I had a female instructor, or I did, but she was older, and I apologize.
No, it's good.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
and tactical officers. Tactical officers are assigned. There are 36 companies broken down into 4 brigades. And so each one of those had a captain or a major. And now they have NCOs attached, which is great too, because that is the backbone of the Army, to guide us, kind of also if there's any disciplinary and things like that. So, and there were female tactical officers when I was there. So as a cadet, but I did not have any.
Well, do you have any memories of any mentors, instructors, or even peers from that time that stand out to you?
Yes, yes, my roommates and uh, and people. Actually, it's mostly folks I went through with. Like we were in the same. Well, I wasn't not the same academic companies, but we went to summer training because you do new cadet training before you go to start school. And then you also, the second year, we go to Camp Buckner and do some more advanced training. And so it was that cohort of some of them ended up being my roommates. Some were just down a couple flights down in my battalion, which would be a grouping of three of these companies. And they're still the people, I look for and tell them I'll go into um, go into the reunion.
Mhm.
So to make sure I meet with them and things like that.
I think it's great that you all still have reunions and come together. That
Yes, we do have our separate ones. Don't tell the guys. But we do have separate events, like even if it's just traveling to Ireland on a coach,
oh,
type of thing.
that is great.
Yes,
And so when kind of looking back at your time at West Point in the early 80s, what are there any more memorable moments, and they could be good or bad, that kind of stand out that you want to share?
yes, yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I swam in the summers. Did not have like a swim team at my high school, small uh, Catholic girls' school, but I swam at the country club next door, and I'm not talking country club,
Yeah.
just golf and a pool, no
Yeah.
tennis. So, so I was pretty good. And so I was a good enough swimmer. You take a swimming test. So I was in the advanced group, but not, I think there may have been one more group ahead, like people who actually were on the swim team. They were in that other group. And at one time, I was a lifeguard. I was a Red Cross lifeguard that summer before I went to West Point, and things like that. So as a civilian, but I became a distressed swimmer. We had all our clothes on, our uniform, boots, and we had to, you know, like take our pants off, not the ends of the pants, make a float out of it by putting air in it and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden, I got kind of flustered, and so I started with the help, and then I went. It was not real deep, and so it was like 10 feet. So I went to the bottom and pushed myself up for a little bit of a rest, and I was a little concerned because no one was coming in to help me. But then I mean, not write it because I was right. This was the wrong thing. I needed to be level. And I leveled myself. And I've been doing the breaststroke since I was 5 years old and winning. So I just did the breaststroke to the side. And the instructor, who's a male infantry major, he said, "Good job," and stuff like that. And then I was like, "Oh, I don't belong here. I don't belong here. I screwed up. I got upset." And stuff like that. And he was saying, "No, you're fine. You're fine. Why don't you come out of the water, get your breath under control and stuff like that." And he actually said, "I want you to come see me." And so I did go see him, and he said, "You did fine. You did great. You're allowed to lose your cool, but you got it back." And that's why, that's the kind of Army officers that we want and we need. So that was the really good. And the fact that he was a great leader, because everybody's a leader, because you're coaching, teaching, or mentoring everybody at one point or another. You better be, because you want them to move forward. And, in essence, I always treat my NCOs, my non-commissioned officers, and everybody under me, that your job is to replace me someday.
Hmm.
So I will teach you everything I know or expose you to it.
That's wonderful. And it's great to know that there were those kind of role models there,
Yes.
especially at that
Yes.
time, for
Yes. Yes.
um well, when looking at you graduate from West Point,
Yes.
can you tell us just a little bit about what did you do after graduation? What was your first assignment?
My first assignment was in Washington State, near Tacoma, Washington. It's Fort Lewis. It's now Fort Lewis and McChord, a joint base Lewis McChord, if I'm not mistaken. And so I was assigned to the 9th Infantry Division, which was actually in Vietnam. So I was kind of a carryover, Vietnam era-ish, which is a whole nother story. But so I went there, and actually I went to Airborne school first. I was not that fast a runner. So I went to jungle school. Cadets go to 2 summer assignments. One is usually a school, airborne school, air assault school. And I went to jungle school down in Panama. And then they go to a cadet leadership training, CTLT. And so as an actual platoon leader in a unit, I went to the drill cadet program because my tactical officer, and I had a different one every year for some reason or another, he said, you need some real life kind of stuff or something, I think. So I got the worst. Everybody said, oh, that's the worst combination. Drill cadet at Fort McClellan, Alabama, which I ended up being stationed at. So I thought, in retrospect, it was pretty cool. And I knew drills. I was familiar with drills. I told you my sister had gone to basic training already, like the summer after her high school graduation. I am her twin sister.
Mhm.
So I went to visit her, and she gave me a uniform. And so this is like where angels go, trouble follows kind of thing. You'll have to look that one up. You're too young. so I put the uniform on. And so I followed her around because I looked very much like her. And we did not get arrested, which is good. And then the only time I messed up is when the cannon went off at the end of the day. Not taps, but you're supposed. Yeah, actually, it is taps. And I did not know to salute the flag. I was saying, you didn't give me a good briefing. No, I'm joking. But I went everywhere, did a lot of things. It's kind of cool.
Well, and you said jungle school, and
Yes.
what would that you go to Panama jungle school, so I'm just assuming it's training out in the jungle?
Yes, in the
Okay.
jungle, correct. Yes, and it's training as infantry. So the first couple days we're learning, how to build a tent with your poncho and some life-saving, just being careful and stuff. Did swimming across jungle waters. They were nice enough to take a boat, actually a landing craft, and go back and forth to scare anything away that was there. So I got, some of the male cadets were allowed to go. There was a active duty, or in this case, it may have been reserve special forces from Utah or something. So they were attached to units there. I was fine not being, so I was in an all cadet one, but we just basically had to perform little patrols, not little, but a patrol, and we had to plan it, and we executed. So I did a lot of laying around, watching out for vampire bats and stuff like that. It is hot as Hades down there.
Yeah.
It was July. So,
Well,
and
Well,
Yes,
and you talk about your sister. Did she stay in the Army very long? Because I know you stayed for, was it 21 years? Did you serve?
yes,
Act
yes.
so I
4 years active duty as a cadet, and then 21 years as an officer.
Okay. Did
So
did she do, because it sounds like you two had some fun. Um,
yes, yeah, she did. She was became a MI officer, military intelligence, and so she worked at the JFK Special Warfare Center. She ran their library. And she actually went through her officer basic course, and because she did so well, she was awarded a three-year active duty assignment, or she would have just come back into the reserve, and she took it.
oh, yeah.
So yeah.
Well, let me ask you this because this is all happening and thinking of like even jungle school, anyone familiar with the military in the 80s probably knows
Yes.
with a little bit going on in places in Central America and
Yes.
but this is all in the context of like also the Cold War. So could you just talk a little bit about like that era and your impressions of that era and you can relate it to the training in your service if you like.
I do remember actually, well, again, my oldest brother, West Point, my twin sister, they were both stationed at Fort Bragg. I don't know when the name, I'm saying the old name because it's in flux, but the current
Right.
name could be. Sorry, I didn't roll my eyes. I'm sorry.
I think it was initially
But
named after was it Braxton Bragg, yeah. Uh
yes,
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes. But I think the naming was similar to me in as a student of history,
Mhm.
similar to Lincoln, how he felt after the Civil War. You know what I mean? We didn't need to beat up everybody. However, I know that those who participated for the
Right.
South in the Civil War are traitors. So, but get along, go along to get along. Again, I'm trying not to be as opinionistic as I was as a younger person and try to see all sides.
But it is
But
it was Fort Bragg.
correct.
It may
And
still
then
be. Oh, yeah.
no, and I apologize because they named it after one of my classmates' fathers, and I'm just drawing a blank here, so I'm apologizing in advance. But so I went down, and we were to visit them when I was a cadet, and we were at a bar, an establishment, and they said she lost her husband down in Grenada, and that's when it kind of hit me that hush, that you know, and that, if I'm not mistaken, was part of the Cold War, the
Mhm.
Grenada. And so, and that's when it hit me that this is real. Not that I decided to leave West Point or anything, but yeah, it gives me goosebumps still today. Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that when people look at this era, recognizing the fear that communism could spread in,
Yes.
it was a big deal. And so, the jungle training that you did was
Which
definitely,
for a reason.
yeah, it was
Yes.
for a reason. Yeah. And so, when you were in the service, from the time you're a cadet to the time that you served your 20 something years after that, what were some of the changes in attitudes and policies that you witnessed or you experienced just as a woman? Because that's a pretty remarkable time for women coming into the military.
Correct. And it got to I did not, I saw it get better. At West Point, 90% of everybody was, inclusive and supportive and things like that. The occasionals, I'm not even going to waste time on those. Type of thing. So it's not quite the 80-20 rule, but this case it was 90-10. And in the military, active duty, not a problem at all. I mean, I provided fuel, ammunition, food, and barbed wire and things like that to uh, an infantry brigade. as a sec, as a, well, I was a little older because I went to college. As a 24-year-old second lieutenant, I was responsible for providing all that to to that brigade to make sure they ordered it, but to make sure it was in the pipeline and physically delivered in some instances. And then we had, would go and brief at the battalion meeting every evening for our customers. I mean, we knew what it was, their customers and things like that. And now even they're more integrated. They and women are in combat now. So of course that has changed. In fact, I'm a snowbird. So I'm in Mississippi right now and usually live in Pennsylvania. And 2 years ago, we were in on the coast, Biloxi, and we were at a seafood at lunch. We were having lunch. And some gentlemen that had been working construction are in there too. And then CNN comes up, and the first woman has graduated from Ranger School, and things like that. And I was there. I wonder if we'll hear anything. One guy said, probably because I learned how to whisper in a sawmill. One guy said, she could probably kick my ass. And he was a big dude. So I took that as a very positive, unsolicited.
Well, and Susan, so at the age of 24, you're in a leadership position too. And
Yes.
that's a pretty young age to take on that. So can you talk a little bit about
Yes.
just what the military taught you in your leadership style, and including the things that you've, obviously taken with you from that?
Yes. So first thing I had to be was confident, because my platoon sergeant, who taught me everything I knew, but he was older than me, kind of thing. And then in the platoon, I had other sergeants that had been in the army. Everybody had been in the army longer than me. Okay. Short of having jump wings, which I got to have some street cred, although it was really difficult mentally to jump out of a perfectly good airplane. So
all your instincts like you should not be doing this, right?
Right. And so, but I did it 5 times. So very happy.
Yeah.
Yes. But, and so I had to be confident. I rehearsed things ahead of time. Like I took people on a convoy, but I rehearsed because my NCO was taught me, you're going to go rehearse this route. First, you're going to do it on the map, and then to come, they taught me, and I was not embarrassed. I didn't act like I knew too much. And so that was great. And I would always ask soldiers, explain what your job, to me. And so I had fuel tankers, like the ones you see driving on the highway. I had 5 or 6 of them assigned to me that I was responsible for. And, we had to do the preventive maintenance and all kinds of things. Lieutenants today are responsible for millions of dollars. The company commander in this case, my boss, was responsible for it on what's called a hand receipt, but in essence, in the day-to-day operations. And then I was responsible for everything my soldiers in my platoon did or failed to do. So, yeah.
And you learned from a lot of people too who were veterans of Vietnam, and I'm assuming Korea, and
Yes.
possibly even some still from the World War II era. Is that?
Yes. Well, my dad was the best because he was very calm-ish. I mean, he was an engineer, and 5 kids was a little bit more than they had planned. So, but he was 46 when my youngest brother was born. But
so do you mind me asking where the twins fit into the 5? Were you all?
My oldest brother, Paul, who went to West Point, and then my sister and I, the twins. Okay. And they thought they were done, but that's a story for another time.
Well, so you went through so much, and you took on all of this at a time where, there's so much changes in the global, like there's so much going on in the world that impacted your life. And so when looking at your service and the 21 years that you spent after being a cadet, you're eventually going to take a lot of the knowledge that you've gained and move into, let's just say, a civilian, maybe, and do contract work. So, can you talk a little bit about that transition for us?
Yes. We're contractors now, and I apologize, in our private company. But both my husband and I, when we got out of the military, retired, sorry, from the military, I became a Department of the Army civilian. Sometimes they call them a DAC or a Govy. I hate Govy. I think I like DAC better. And so I worked for U.S. Army Cadet Command at Fort Knox doing recruiting. But since I had been a professor of military science at Rutgers and in charge of the whole Army program there, I was very happy to be on their staff, because then they had somebody who actually knew what it was to be on the front line. I mean, it's a recruiting effort, training, and leadership. And so I would just mention to folks, has anybody here ever been to an ROTC battalion? And my people had not. The job I took from when I retired, and then took it over as a GS-13. I asked, and one guy had, because he'd been ROTC, so that was good. So first thing I did was take them to one. We got a van and we went to it so they could see what it was like for a cadet battalion, so they could understand better and make better decisions. Because I was responsible for what their mission was, and the mission is not to take that hill or to support and defend. It's administrative. It is to produce lieutenants, train and commission lieutenants into the United States Army for the Guard, the Reserve, and for the active force as required. And so so I made sure I championed them whenever possible, that they knew what was going on. I mean, if I went to a large meeting and things like that, I consider myself, and I'm not shy and quiet. So,
But you're continuing to prepare the next
yes,
line.
correct.
So let's back up though, because you mentioned Rutgers. And
Yes.
so let's go back to that for a minute and tell us about your time there. Well,
After I was fortunate enough to be selected to go back to West Point and teach, I taught leadership in the Department of Behavioral Sciences and Leadership. And then after that 3-year tour, I was selected to be the professor of military science at Rutgers University it's not in Piscataway. All of a sudden I'm drawing a blank it's further south in New Jersey. And I actually got to live in my hometown, which was had a nice 60 to 90-minute commute, but everybody in that part of Philadelphia's Somerset. I was in Somerset, New Jersey. Was good. So it was a typical commute. Yes. So that was great. In fact, I was the first female professor of military science, which and I was asked to come and talk to a group of people on the university. And I mentioned that, well, yeah, there's myself and my 12 trained killers. But we're trained killers. I'm sorry. I wasn't, I'm saying it jokingly, but maybe I was too cavalier. That's what it was. And so I never said that again. Luckily, I learned that in the beginning. But my dedicated and very well-trained staff. We had non-commissioned officers from the Guard, and from mostly active duty, but we produced a lot of officers for the New Jersey National Guard, because you could go upwards, you could get your master's degree in New Jersey using ROTC, or they would pay for it if you went into the Guard. So we would try to, whatever was best for the cadet, we would leverage the combination. So you have to, not just an administrator, but we also had to make sure that they were progressing towards graduation. So we were academic coaches and all things. And I did have cadets these cadets had real world, they had their academics paid for, some of them, and some of them joined the Guard anyway, and they got their academics paid. And they said, well, I'll go in ROTC, then I can be an officer when I finish, when I graduate, and then get commissioned. But they had bills to pay, they had housing to find, they worked. So it was much more real life. The cadets at West Point, very easy. They're the hardest thing. Yes, they took very little tending. And I was, as a professor, I also academically coached 20 cadets and things like that. So, but it was more realistic.
Yeah.
Haven't been to real college for 2 years myself.
Well, and you're dealing with students who are trying to balance all that life has
Yes,
versus the students who are able to kind of go and just devote all their time to something.
yes.
And
And I had to let two of them, I brought two in and had to, I'm taking your scholarship away. Or you're not, or for one, and the other one, you're not progressing. Have I given you enough? Do you feel I've given you enough? How do you feel about the opportunities you've had? And so I let people go. In fact, but it ended up being the pruning that was required because it flourished. My program flourished afterwards because some people felt, and haven't been the person who had over excel in order to be considered average. I didn't want them to feel that, but I knew it when I could see it. And so it was men and women alike that I had to.
Well, and you practice high teacher expectations, and that usually research shows that actually is better. Like,
Yes.
if you're struggling, if you help support them and stuff, the outcome's better. And it's wonderful that you had a popular program.
Yes, and I know the Tactics Club was the most popular group, but the Scabbard and Blade, which was unique only to Rutgers, became the popular group because it was academics, scores on the PT test, and as the items that they cherished in their club, as opposed to just going on long road marches and things like that. So the Tactics Club did not go away. They're members of both of them, but it wasn't where Cadet Command, where the Army was going forward. So that's why I put my emphasis on the other club.
So when would this have been, your time teaching?
Oh, yes. Right after 2000 to 2003, because in 2000, my husband was actually on active duty in the New Jersey National Guard. And so after 9/11, he was up at Ground Zero and the French Kills for his, he spent time there. In fact, he's got issues and injuries from his time there on November 12th. So.
Well, okay, so you're at West Point as a cadet in the early 80s. Now you're teaching in the early 2000s. In between there, the Cold War sup supposedly ended. So,
Yes,
uh,
I I personally have never trusted Vladimir Putin. Okay, so and I feel badly for the people who live in the current in Russia. So, but I think he's doing them a disservice. But yes, I guess maybe I was brainwashed
well,
with
do
the
you
Cold
think,
War.
when because you probably remember the Berlin Wall. I imagine you probably remember
Yes,
very
yes.
well. And
Tearing down that wall. Oh, I forgot to say that I marched in Reagan's first inauguration
did you really?
parade down
Okay.
in DC. And so, and potentially, I got a lot of people were saying, go girl, yay women kind of thing. And I was the only, I was the only freshman who went because I won, was a contest for the knowledge that about West Point and about weapons. And so I won that contest and I got to go. So
You got to
there
witness.
wasn't this,
Do what? I'm
yes,
sorry. Go ahead.
there was a disappointment though. Omar Bradley had passed, and who I admired
Mhm.
because he was a soldier's general. And so, and the group of us who were trained, who who marched all around practicing for the inauguration, were told, well, everybody but the women get to go to Omar Bradley's because I don't want to say, yeah, everybody but the women. That's all I'm going to say.
And Omar Bradley's one of the most well-known generals from World War II.
Yes, and
Mhm.
like I said, I admired him until then.
Okay. Well, so you're in the army when the Cold War ends. So you remember the wall coming down within a few years,
Yes,
Russia withdraws from the Soviet Union. Can you just give me a little bit of sense of what were your thoughts at the time? Because, you mentioned, and I think a lot of people, the Russian people, I've met a number of people who are Russian over the years and they're amazing, just very
yes.
so, but can you give us a little sense of like the early 90s being in the military? What were you hoping for, maybe? Did you have any disappointments along the way? Just your own personal take.
93 to 96, I was stationed in Germany with my husband and my our daughter. And so we have a blended family. Our son was with his mother in Arkansas. So the I went. I went to the former Soviet Union. Granted, it was 93, but I just wanted to see what it looked like shortly afterwards. Just I went to uh, Budvar, which is what Budweiser was first brewed. Yes, it's very close to where I was in Bavaria in Germany, and so went there and and have and did some exploring because I wanted to see what it was like. I mean, I've also been to China because, I just, these are not closed. I've also been to Egypt, but, places where you need visas to go in, where you can't just waltz in.
So,
So,
did
just
you
to
feel
see
it
what the life.
in being in Germany, you could see a pretty big difference between East Germany and West Germany as far as development?
Yes, 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 yes. And yes, the Skoda, yes, everything was, yeah, like they used a lot of coal. Everything was very had ash and or literal pollution
Yeah.
and things like that. Where the the um, the West Germans, every time we used uh, land that we're authorized to, we had to make sure it was pristine uh, after we used it for training, which is how it should be, you know,
Yeah.
type of thing. No spilt oil.
Make it, yeah. And so sort of looking back at your time, um, what are some of the big takeaways from your career and the impact that your service had and 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 as a woman at a time when you were, what would you say, maybe probably 90 to 10%.
Yes,
So what are some of the main takeaways just from your career and
I would
having,
do it again. Again, other than as I got more senior, it's a pyramid. There are way more lieutenants than there are lieutenant colonels, and so when I would go to meetings or conferences, I would be the only woman, or even sometimes, yeah, meetings, smaller meetings, and I just didn't like being the only one. I prefer if there were more. So not that I think I know DEI is uh, not a great term, but it's real life. Uh, when students see somebody that looks like them teaching them, it makes them feel like they can achieve and things like that. So
there's something to be said for recognizing that you can be represented somewhere.
yes,
I had
right,
a
and
Yeah. I had a one time when engineering is a dominated field still by men, and we've tried really hard to recruit a lot of females into that. But I remember one
yes,
time I was actually at a place and they were doing like a banquet next door. And it was one of those things I looked in there and I thought, well, I know we're trying to get more women to apply to these programs. More women are going to college and we need engineers. But then I'm looking at a room and thinking, I get why it would be hard for some women to think I could do that,
yes,
and of course,
yes.
nothing against any of the individuals in the room, and many of them may be wondering the same thing looking around, like we need more women. But I'm not sure if that adds to your point or if that's kind of,
Oh, no, it does, because I went to an engineering school. Granted, they have all kinds of other uh, majors now and such, but there were as many guys as women. I mean, who are not comfortable in their mathematics,
Mhm.
and somehow they make it. They made it through West Point. They don't maybe become engineers if they don't have to. At that point in West Point, they had to. And we were the last class for that. And then you could choose majors after that. So it's math background, um, math tutoring, the fact that you're better at it than you think you are.
There are things
And
that
which
still
is why
kind of,
yeah,
yeah, very early on too. We know that there are certain aspects of the culture that kind of do still want to steer certain groups this way and that way, um, and here we are all these years later, still struggling with math education. Just saying, like,
yes,
all all
you're
around.
correct.
So when you look at your experiences and today and thinking about maybe a woman who's maybe just graduated from high school who's watching this, what advice would you give to young women who are considering maybe going into the military?
I think it's a great idea. Actually, you should seriously consider it, because it'll give you the responsibility, that'll give you the confidence, because you'll be fine. And also, you have uh, opportunities for training, for leadership. And that's one of the reasons why ROTC, excuse me,
Good.
sorry, that ROTC and West Point graduates are in demand. I mean, you go, you're expected to go 5 years active military, um, and 3 years in the reserve after you graduate from ROTC or West Point. And that's a great new person's resume. They show how many people you were responsible as a 21 to 25-year-old, a platoon, or all the equipment you were responsible, and things like that. It's a great place to start, which is an old Army commercial. I'm sorry, but it really is.
Well, and it's and then of course you may be one of those like you who decide to stay. And
And correct, correct. And I had thought at one point of leaving, um, but I'm glad I didn't.
well,
Twice actually, and I'm
having
glad
all
I
this
didn't.
having all this experience, if you could go back to that community college student who was
Yes,
applying, what kind of advice would you give yourself?
run more.
One more.
Because academics were fine.
Yeah.
So it just
Well, and there's, one of the things too, I think when we talked about it on the phone, there was a good saying that you said, and it was, I think, sharpen your axe. Um,
yes,
what was
right. As you get older, and which everybody does, you move up and stuff. You may not, uh, if you're in a log cutting competition, if you don't have the muscles, sometimes you have to sharpen your other muscle, your
Yeah.
brain, and um,
Well, this has
yes,
been
relax.
a lot of fun, Susan. And is there anything else that you
Thank you,
would,
Jillian.
yeah, was there anything else that you would like to share?
No, no, I did have, I'm sorry, alibi. I did have a female French teacher. My French instructor is a female officer.
Nice. And I miss the days of languages. So,
Yes,
oh, and so I thank you so much for coming today and your willingness to share your experiences because I know that, just having somebody who graduated from West Point, but coming from the 80s and being one of those first my recording now and try to save it and then I will exit the room. All right.